Every morning as the sun began to peek over the horizon and paint the sky with soft hues of orange and pink, a young girl named Maya made her way to Lou's diner. She was always alone, her small frame wrapped in a slightly oversized jacket that she wore like armor against the world. Her braids bounced gently with each step, and her hands clutched an old notebook so tightly it looked like it might tear apart at any moment. To most people passing by, she blended into the background, a quiet, unassuming figure who seemed easy to overlook. But inside Lou's diner there was one person who noticed her. Grace had been working at Lou's for what felt like forever. She wasn't just a waitress. She was the heart of the place. With her warm smile and quick wit, Grace made everyone feel welcome, from truck drivers grabbing breakfast before hitting the road to families celebrating birthdays over pancakes. Over the years, she'd seen countless faces come and go, but something about Maya caught her attention right away. It wasn't just because Maya came every single day without fail. It was the way she carried herself. There was a sadness in her eyes, a hesitancy in her movements, as though she wasn't quite sure if she belonged there. Maya always arrived at exactly 7:30 a.m., never a minute earlier or later. She would push open the diner door with one hand while holding her notebook close to her chest with the other. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully, but Maya didn't seem to notice. Instead, she scanned the room quickly, almost nervously, before heading straight to the same corner booth near the window. Once seated, she would pull out her notebook and start writing, her pencil moving furiously across the pages. Sometimes, she stopped mid-sentence, staring out the window as if searching for answers somewhere beyond the glass. At first, Grace tried not to stare. After all, it wasn't polite to pry into someone else's business, especially when they clearly wanted to be left alone. But curiosity got the better of her. Who was this little girl? Why did she spend hours sitting in a diner instead of playing outside like other kids her age? And why did she look so lost? One chilly morning, Grace decided to take matters into her own hands. As usual, Maya sat in her usual spot, sipping on a cup of hot chocolate, the only thing she ever ordered. Grace approached the table with a friendly smile, balancing a tray with one hand. "Morning, sweetheart," she said warmly. "How about some pancakes today? On the house." Maya froze, her wide eyes darting up to meet Grace's. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then slowly Maya nodded, her grip on the notebook loosening slightly. Grace slid the plate onto the table and gave her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "You let me know if you need anything else, okay?" That simple act of kindness marked the beginning of a special connection between the two. Over the next few days, Grace found excuses to check in on Maya more often. She brought her extra slices of toast, refilled her drink before it was even empty, and even tucked tiny notes under her napkin that read things like, "Keep shining," or "Your words matter." At first, Maya barely said a word in response, but Grace could tell she appreciated the effort. Little by little, Maya started opening up. One rainy Tuesday, Grace finally worked up the courage to ask the question that had been nagging at her for weeks. "What are you always writing in that notebook of yours?" she asked casually, leaning against the edge of the booth. Maya hesitated, glancing down at the worn cover of her notebook. Then, with a shy smile, she opened it to reveal page after page filled with poems. Some were short and sweet, others long and complex, but all of them carried a depth that surprised Grace. "These are amazing," Grace breathed, genuinely impressed. "You're really talented, you know that?" Maya blushed, ducking her head to hide her grin. "Thanks," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. But Grace could see the pride flickering in her eyes. From that moment on, their bond grew stronger. Grace became more than just a waitress to Maya. She became a friend, a confidant, someone Maya could trust in a world that often felt cold and confusing. For Maya, Lou's diner quickly transformed from just another building on the street into a safe haven. It was a place where she could escape the noise and chaos of her life, even if just for a little while. Here, surrounded by the comforting aroma of coffee and freshly baked pies, she felt seen in a way she rarely did anywhere else. Grace's kindness reminded her that maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't entirely cruel after all. As the weeks turned into months, Maya continued to visit the diner daily, her presence becoming as familiar as the ticking clock on the wall. And though Grace still didn't know much about Maya's life outside those four walls, she sensed that something heavy weighed on the young girl's shoulders. Whatever it was, Grace vowed silently to do whatever she could to lighten the load, even if it meant simply being there, offering a listening ear and a warm smile. Unbeknownst to either of them, however, change was coming. A storm was brewing on the horizon, one that would shake the foundations of their newfound friendship and force both Maya and Grace to confront truths they weren't ready for. But for now, they cherished these quiet mornings together, finding comfort in the simplicity of shared moments and stolen glances. Because sometimes in life, the smallest acts of kindness can create ripples that lead to extraordinary outcomes. As the days turned into weeks, Maya's visits to Lou's diner became a cherished routine for both her and Grace. Each morning, the little girl would walk through the door with her notebook tucked under her arm, her steps growing just a bit lighter each time. The transformation was subtle, hardly noticeable to anyone who didn't know her well, but Grace saw it clearly. Maya's shoulders weren't hunched quite as much anymore, and her eyes didn't dart around nervously when she entered. She still chose the same corner booth near the window, but now she smiled faintly when Grace greeted her, her voice soft but steady. Grace made it her mission to make every visit special for Maya. On some mornings, she'd sneak an extra cookie onto Maya's plate alongside her usual hot chocolate. Other times, she'd leave tiny notes written on napkins. Dream big, or your words can change the world. These small gestures might have seemed insignificant to others, but to Maya, they were everything. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone believed in her, not because they had to, but because they genuinely wanted to. One particularly gray morning, when raindrops tapped rhythmically against the diner windows, Maya surprised Grace by speaking up without being prompted. Do you think I could be a writer someday?" she asked hesitantly, her gaze fixed on the swirls of steam rising from her mug. Her voice was barely above a whisper, as though she feared saying the words out loud would somehow jinx them. Grace stopped mid-pour at the coffee station and turned to look at her. "Of course you can," she replied firmly, setting down the pot and walking over to Maya's table. She slid into the seat across from her, ignoring the clatter of dishes and chatter of other customers behind her. "Why wouldn't you be? You've got talent, sweetheart. Talent that most people only dream of having." Maya blinked, taken aback by Grace's certainty. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. At school, kids teased her for spending lunch breaks scribbling in her notebook instead of playing tag on the playground. At home, there was no one to encourage her dreams, just silence, broken occasionally by shouting matches that made her retreat deeper into herself. But here, in this cozy diner filled with the smell of bacon and syrup, Grace treated her like she mattered, like her words mattered. "I don't know," Maya murmured, tracing the rim of her mug with her finger. "What if I'm not good enough?" Grace leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "Let me tell you something," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "When I was your age, I used to love drawing pictures. I thought maybe one day I'd become an artist. But then life got busy, and I stopped believing in myself. I let fear get in the way of my dreams, and you know what? I regret it. Don't make the same mistake, Maya. If writing makes you happy, then hold on to it with both hands. Don't let anyone take that away from you." Maya listened intently, her eyes wide with wonder. She had never heard anyone talk about dreams and fears so openly. It was as if Grace had reached inside her chest and pulled out all the doubts she'd been too afraid to name. For the first time, Maya allowed herself to imagine a future where her poems weren't just scribbles in a worn-out notebook. They were something more. Something meaningful. Over the next few weeks, their conversations grew longer and more frequent. Grace encouraged Maya to share snippets of her poetry, which she did shyly at first. One poem was about the stars she watched from her bedroom window, late at night imagining them as whispers from another world. Another described the sound of rain hitting the pavement outside her house, turning ordinary droplets into symphonies. Each piece revealed a glimpse of Maya's inner world, a place brimming with imagination and longing. Grace marveled at how vivid and raw Maya's words were. They carried a weight far beyond her years, yet they also shimmered with hope. "You're going places, kiddo," Grace told her one morning after Maya read aloud a particularly moving poem about courage. "Mark my words." But even as their bond deepened, Grace couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Maya rarely talked about her life outside the diner, and whenever Grace gently prodded, the girl would clam up, her cheerful demeanor fading instantly. There were hints, though, tiny cracks in the facade that gave Grace pause. Once Maya flinched when the bell above the door jingled loudly. Another time, she winced when a customer accidentally bumped into her chair. And then there was the faint bruise on her wrist that disappeared the next day, replaced by long sleeves despite the warm weather. Grace didn't press her. She knew better than to push someone who clearly wasn't ready to talk. Instead, she doubled down on her efforts to make the diner a safe space for Maya. She started keeping a stash of colored pencils and sketch paper behind the counter, surprising Maya with them one morning. "For inspiration," she explained with a wink. Maya's face lit up, and for a moment the shadows in her eyes vanished completely. The other regulars at Lou's began to notice Maya too. Old Mr. Harris, who always sat at the counter nursing a cup of black coffee, started leaving quarters on her table for ice cream money. Mrs. Peterson, a retired teacher who came in every Thursday for pie, offered to proofread Maya's poems if she wanted feedback. Even Grumpy Joe, the mechanic, who complained about everything, softened when he saw Maya sitting quietly in her booth. He once muttered, "Good kid," under his breath as he passed by, earning a grin from Grace. For Maya, these moments added up to something extraordinary. In a world that often felt harsh and unkind, Lou's Diner was a refuge. Here, surrounded by people who cared about her even in small ways, she found a sense of belonging she hadn't known existed. Grace wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a guardian angel in an apron, someone Maya trusted implicitly. And while the outside world still loomed large and uncertain, the diner provided a buffer, a cocoon of warmth and acceptance that shielded her from its worst blows. Yet despite the joy and safety Maya found within those walls, Grace couldn't ignore the nagging worry in the back of her mind. Something about Maya's guardedness hinted at a story far darker than either of them had dared to discuss. Grace wondered how long she could protect Maya from whatever demons followed her outside the diner's doors. She prayed silently that the peace Maya had found here would last, that it would be enough to carry her through whatever storms lay ahead. Little did Grace know, fate had plans of its own. Change was coming, and it would arrive in the form of a sleek black car that would pull up outside the diner one crisp autumn morning, its arrival heralding a chain of events neither Grace nor Maya could have anticipated. But for now, they savored these quiet moments together, finding solace in the simplicity of shared smiles and whispered encouragement. Because sometimes, even the smallest acts of kindness can plant seeds of hope that bloom into something beautiful and enduring. It was a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the air carried a faint chill and the leaves crunched underfoot like nature's own confetti. Maya arrived at Lou's Diner as usual, her notebook tucked securely under her arm. She wore her favorite hoodie, a faded blue one with a tiny hole near the sleeve, and her braids swayed gently as she pushed open the door. The familiar jingle of the bell greeted her, and she made her way to her usual booth by the window. Outside, the world seemed alive with movement. Cars driving past, people hurrying to work, and a soft breeze scattering golden leaves across the sidewalk. Grace noticed Maya right away, as she always did. She poured a fresh cup of hot chocolate and brought it over, along with a plate of buttery toast sprinkled with cinnamon sugar, a treat she knew Maya loved. "Morning, sunshine," Grace said warmly, sliding the plate onto the table. "How's the writing coming along?" Maya smiled shyly, her fingers tracing the edge of her notebook. "It's okay," she replied softly. "I'm working on something new." Before Grace could ask more, the bell above the door jingled again. This time, however, the sound was followed by an unusual silence. Everyone in the diner turned to look, including Maya, who glanced up briefly before returning her attention to her notebook. A man stepped inside, his polished black shoes clicking against the tiled floor. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that looked expensive enough to buy half the furniture in the diner. His presence commanded attention, not just because of his appearance, but because he radiated a quiet authority that made people pause. The man scanned the room slowly, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. When his gaze landed on Maya, something shifted in his expression. For a brief moment, his stern face softened almost imperceptibly before hardening again. Without saying a word, he walked to a nearby table near the window, deliberately choosing a spot where he could keep an eye on her. He sat down and ordered a coffee, his voice low and clipped, leaving no room for small talk with the server. Grace felt a knot tighten in her stomach. There was something unsettling about this stranger, something that didn't sit right with her instincts. She had spent years honed by experience, learning to read people quickly, and this man gave off vibes she couldn't quite place. Was he dangerous, or just out of place in their humble diner? Either way, his focus on Maya made Grace uneasy. For the next hour, the man stayed seated, sipping his coffee and occasionally glancing at Maya. He didn't approach her or try to speak to her, but his presence lingered like a shadow. Maya seemed oblivious at first, absorbed in her writing, but Grace noticed how her shoulders tensed slightly whenever she glanced up and caught sight of him. It was subtle, a flicker of discomfort, but Grace saw it. Unable to ignore the growing tension, Grace decided to intervene. Carrying a fresh pot of coffee, she approached the man's table with a polite smile. "Refill?" she offered, her tone friendly but firm. The man looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers. "No, thank you," he replied curtly. Then, after a pause, he added, "You run a good establishment here?" Grace nodded, though her smile faltered slightly. "Thank you," she said. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" The man hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and gestured toward Maya with a slight tilt of his head. "That girl," he began, his voice quieter now. "Does she come here often?" Grace's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her composure. "She does," she answered evenly. "Why do you ask?" The man studied her for a moment, then sighed, deeply. "My name is Marcus Reed," he said, lowering his voice further. "And that girl, she's my niece." Grace froze, her mind racing. Niece? This man claimed to be related to Maya? She searched his face for any sign of deception, but found none, just a mixture of sadness and determination. Still, she couldn't shake her unease. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reed," she said cautiously, "but Maya's never mentioned you before." Marcus nodded as if expecting this reaction. "I don't blame her," he admitted. "I haven't been part of her life for a long time, but I'm trying to change that now." Grace crossed her arms, her protective instincts kicking into high gear. "Look, I don't mean to pry, but Maya's a special kid. She's been through a lot, and she deserves people who truly care about her. So forgive me if I'm skeptical." Marcus held her gaze, unfazed by her skepticism. "I understand your concern," he said calmly, "but let me explain. Maya's mother, my sister, passed away years ago. After that, she ended up living with our brother, her father. Let's just say he hasn't been the best influence. Recently, I found out some things that made me realize I need to step in, but it's complicated. He won't give her up easily." Grace listened intently, her initial suspicion giving way to curiosity. "So what are you planning to do?" she asked. "For now, I'm biding my time," Marcus replied. "I want to get to know her again, earn her trust. That's why I've been coming here, to watch over her without causing a scene. I know it looks strange, but I promise my intentions are good." Grace mulled this over, torn between caution and hope. On one hand, Marcus's story checked out. He carried himself like someone used to getting what he wanted, and his concern for Maya seemed genuine. On the other hand, introducing a new figure into Maya's already fragile life was risky. What if he disrupted the delicate balance they'd built together at the diner? "I'll think about it," Grace finally said, her tone firm. "But if you really care about Maya, you'll proceed carefully. She's been hurt enough." Marcus nodded solemnly. "I understand, and I appreciate your protectiveness. You clearly mean a lot to her." With that, Grace returned to the counter, her mind swirling with questions. Should she tell Maya about Marcus? How would the girl react? And most importantly, could she trust this man who had suddenly appeared out of nowhere? The morning wore on. Marcus eventually left, slipping out the door as quietly as he had come. Maya didn't seem to notice his departure. She remained engrossed in her writing, her pencil moving steadily across the page. Grace watched her from afar, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. She knew that whatever decision she made next would have lasting consequences, for Maya, for Marcus, and for herself. Outside, the Rolls-Royce gleamed in the sunlight, its polished surface reflecting the vibrant colors of fall. To anyone passing by, it might have looked like just another luxury car parked outside a modest diner. But to Grace, it symbolized uncertainty, a harbinger of change that could either bring healing or upheaval. As she wiped down the counters and refilled cups of coffee, she couldn't help but wonder, what would happen when Maya finally learned the truth about the man watching her from afar? And how would their little sanctuary at Lou's Diner hold up against the storm that seemed inevitable? For now, though, the diner buzzed with its usual rhythm, the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, and the comforting aroma of bacon and pancakes. Life went on, blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding beneath its roof. And in her corner booth, Maya continued to write, her words flowing freely, untouched, for the moment, by the turmoil brewing just beyond her reach. Over the next few days, Marcus Reed became a regular fixture at Lou's Diner. Each morning he arrived in his sleek black Rolls-Royce, parking it conspicuously outside as if to announce his presence. He always wore the same polished demeanor, his suits immaculate, his posture straight and his gaze sharp. Yet there was something softer about him now, a vulnerability that peeked through when he looked at Maya. It was clear he was trying to tread carefully, balancing his desire to reconnect with her against the need to avoid scaring her off. Grace kept her promise to keep Marcus's secret, for now. She hadn't told Maya anything about their conversation or his claim to be her uncle. Instead, she observed quietly, watching how Marcus interacted with the girl who had unknowingly become the center of his world once again. At first, he simply sat at his usual table near the window, sipping coffee and occasionally glancing in Maya's direction. But as the days passed, he grew bolder, inching closer to her orbit. One chilly morning, Marcus approached Maya's booth for the first time. Grace tensed up behind the counter, ready to intervene if needed, but she forced herself to stay back. This was Maya's moment, not hers. Marcus stopped a few feet away from the table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "Maya," he said softly, his voice steady but tinged with nervousness. "Do you remember me?" Maya froze, her pencil hovering mid-sentence above her notebook. Her wide eyes flicked up to meet his, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then slowly, recognition dawned on her face. "Uncle Marcus?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the low hum of the diner. Marcus nodded, relief washing over his features. "Yes, it's me," he said, taking a tentative step closer. "I know it's been a long time since we've seen each other. Too long, honestly. But I'd like to change that, if you'll let me." Maya didn't respond, immediately. She stared at him, her expression guarded as if trying to decide whether this man before her was real or just another figment of her imagination. Finally, she closed her notebook and set it aside. "Why are you here?" she asked bluntly, her tone wary. Marcus sighed, pulling out the chair across from her and sitting down without waiting for an invitation. "Because I should have been here sooner," he admitted. "Your mom, my sister, was my best friend. After she passed, I let things fall apart. I wasn't there for you when I should have been, and for that I'm sorry." Maya's fingers twisted around the edge of her napkin, betraying her unease. "You left," she said quietly. "You never called, never visited." "I know," Marcus replied, his voice heavy with regret. "And I can't take that back, but I want to make things right. You deserve better than what you've been given, Maya. Better than what your dad has provided." The mention of her father caused Maya to flinch visibly. Grace, still watching from the counter, felt her heart. She knew all too well the pain that lingered in Maya's home life, even if she hadn't heard the specifics. Whatever horrors Maya endured behind closed doors, they were etched into her soul in ways that no amount of kindness could fully erase. Marcus must have noticed her reaction because he softened his tone. "I don't expect you to trust me right away," he continued, "but I'd like to try, to get to know you again, to help you however I can." For a long while, Maya said nothing. She stared at him, her dark eyes searching his face for any sign of dishonesty. Then almost imperceptibly, she nodded. "Okay," she murmured. "We can try." That single word, "okay," felt monumental. It opened the door to a fragile new chapter in Maya's life, one filled with uncertainty but also the faint glimmer of hope. Over the following weeks, Marcus began to integrate himself into Maya's routine. He brought her small gifts, a sturdy new backpack to replace her worn-out one, a set of colored pencils for her sketches, and books by poets whose words might inspire her own. Each offering was practical yet thoughtful, designed to show Maya that he cared without overwhelming her. Their conversation started cautiously. At first, Marcus stuck to safe topics: school, hobbies, favorite foods. Slowly, though, he ventured into more personal territory, sharing stories about Maya's mother. She used to love painting sunsets, he told her one morning, a fond smile tugging at his lips. Said they reminded her of endless possibilities. "Do you remember that?" Maya nodded shyly. "Yeah, I do. She used to hang them on the fridge." "She was proud of you, you know," Marcus added gently. "Even before you started writing poetry, she talked about how smart and creative you were. She believed in you, Maya, just like I do." Hearing those words seemed to unlock something inside Maya. For so long she had carried the weight of feeling invisible, unimportant. But here was someone telling her that she mattered, that she had always mattered. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly, unwilling to let them fall in front of him. Grace watched these interactions closely, her initial skepticism giving way to cautious optimism. Marcus wasn't perfect. He was still a stranger in many ways, but his efforts to connect with Maya were sincere. He listened when she spoke, respected her boundaries, and never pushed too hard. In return, Maya began to open up to him, sharing fragments of her poetry and talking about her dreams of becoming a writer someday. But not everyone at the diner approved of Marcus's sudden appearance. Some of the regulars whispered disapprovingly among themselves, casting suspicious glances his way. Old Mr. Harris, who usually kept to himself, muttered under his breath one morning, "Something ain't right about that guy." Even Mrs. Peterson, who adored Maya, expressed concern to Grace during one of their chats. "He shows up out of nowhere after all these years and expects her to trust him. Seems fishy to me." Grace understood their doubts. Trust didn't come easily, especially in situations like this. But she also knew how much Maya craved stability and love, things Marcus seemed determined to provide. "Let's give him a chance," Grace urged, her tone firm but kind. "Maya needs someone who believes in her. If Marcus is willing to step up, then maybe we should support that." Despite her reassurances, Grace couldn't ignore the gnawing worry in the back of her mind. What if Marcus's intentions weren't entirely pure? What if he disrupted the delicate balance Maya had found at the diner? These questions lingered, unresolved, until the day everything came crashing down. It happened on a Tuesday morning, one of those crisp autumn days where the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and fallen leaves. Maya and Marcus were seated together at her usual booth, deep in conversation. They laughed softly at some shared memory, and for a brief moment, it felt like they were truly connecting. Then, the bell above the door jingled loudly, and a figure stormed into the diner. It was Maya's father. He looked furious, his face flushed red and his fists clenched at his sides. His eyes scanned the room frantically until they landed on Marcus. "What the hell are you doing here?" he barked, his voice cutting through the quiet murmur of the diner like a knife. Everyone froze. The cheerful chatter died instantly, replaced by a tense silence. Marcus stood up calmly, his expression unreadable. "I think you know why I'm here," he replied evenly. "We need to talk." "No, we don't," Maya's father snapped, striding toward their table. His gaze shifted to Maya, who shrank, back instinctively. "And you... what are you doing with him? Did he put you up to this?" I didn't..." Maya stammered, her voice trembling. She looked to Marcus for help, but he stepped forward, placing himself between her and her father. "This isn't about her," Marcus said firmly. "It's about you, about the choices you've made and the damage you've caused. I won't stand by and watch you destroy her future," Maya's father sneered, his anger boiling over. "You abandoned us. You didn't care then, so why start pretending now?" "I'm here because I should have been here all along," Marcus shot back, his voice rising. "And I'm not leaving until Maya is safe." The argument escalated quickly, drawing stares from every corner of the diner. Grace rushed over, her maternal instincts kicking in. "Sir, please," she pleaded, trying to defuse the situation. "This isn't the place for this." But Maya's father wasn't listening. His rage consumed him, and he lunged toward Marcus, shouting accusations and threats. Chaos erupted as chairs scraped against the floor and customers scrambled to get out of the way. Amid the commotion, Maya slipped unnoticed out of her booth and bolted for the door. By the time Grace realized what had happened, Maya was gone. The cold autumn wind whipped through the open doorway, carrying with it the faint scent of rain. Outside, the Rolls-Royce gleamed under the gray sky, its polished surface reflecting the turmoil inside. Grace's heart sank as she turned back to the scene unfolding in the diner. Marcus stood frozen, his face pale with shock, while Maya's father fumed, his chest heaving with exertion. In that moment, Grace understood the enormity of what they were facing. Marcus's arrival had stirred up old wounds, forcing secrets into the light. And while his intentions might have been noble, the consequences were far-reaching. Maya, caught in the middle of it all, had fled, not just from the diner, but from the storm brewing around her. As the chaos settled and the diner emptied of shocked patrons, Grace and Marcus exchanged a silent look. Both knew they had failed. Maya, in that moment. Now the question remained, could they find her before it was too late? And more importantly, could they protect her from the dangers lurking just beyond the safety of Lou's diner? The moment Maya disappeared through the diner door, panic surged through Grace like a tidal wave. She felt her chest tighten as she scanned the room, her eyes darting between Marcus and the empty space where Maya had been sitting just moments ago. The argument between Marcus and Maya's father still hung heavy in the air, but now it felt like background noise compared to the urgency of finding the girl who meant so much to both of them. Grace turned to Marcus, her voice sharp with desperation. "We need to find her. Now." Marcus nodded, his face pale but resolute. For all his confidence earlier, he looked shaken, guilt etched into every line of his expression. "I'll go check outside," he said quickly, already heading toward the door. "You stay here in case she comes back." Grace hesitated for a split second, torn between following him and staying put. But she knew Marcus was right. Someone needed to remain at the diner in case Maya returned. So, she stayed behind, pacing anxiously near the counter while keeping one eye on the entrance. Her mind raced with questions. Where could Maya have gone? Was she safe? And how much damage had this confrontation caused? Outside, Marcus hurried down the sidewalk, scanning the streets for any sign of Maya. His heart pounded as he replayed the scene in his head. The shouting, the accusations, the raw fear in Maya's eyes before she bolted. He cursed himself silently for not foreseeing this outcome. He'd wanted to protect her, to shield her from harm, but instead he might have driven her further away. He called out her name softly, careful not to draw too much attention from passers-by. "Maya, it's me, Marcus, please wait." But there was no response, just the sound of leaves rustling in the wind and distant car engines humming in the background. Meanwhile, back at the diner, Grace busied herself tidying up tables, anything, to keep her hands occupied while her mind spun with worry. She glanced at the clock every few minutes, willing time to move faster so that Maya would walk back through the door. But the minutes dragged on, each tick echoing louder than the last. Finally, unable to sit idly any longer, Grace grabbed her coat and stepped outside. The cold air hit her face like a slap, reminding her of how vulnerable Maya must feel alone, out there. She walked briskly down the street, retracing the route Maya usually took to get to the diner. Along the way, she asked shopkeepers and pedestrians if they'd seen a young girl matching Maya's description. Some shook their heads, others offered vague suggestions that led nowhere. Still, Grace pressed on, refusing to give up hope. After what felt like hours, but was likely only 30 minutes, Grace spotted Marcus sitting on a bench in the nearby park. His shoulders slumped, his head bowed in defeat. Beside him lay Maya's old notebook, its pages fluttering gently in the breeze. Grace's stomach dropped as she approached him. "Did you find her?" she asked, though the answer was already clear. Marcus shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "No, but I found this." He held up the notebook, his hands trembling slightly. It was lying on the ground near the swings. She must have dropped it when she ran. Grace took the notebook from him, her fingers brushing against the worn cover. Inside, Maya's poems stared back at her, each word a testament to her talent and resilience. Grace flipped through the pages, searching for clues, anything that might hint at where Maya had gone. Then, tucked inside the back cover, she found a folded piece of paper. Unfolding it carefully, she discovered a hastily scrawled note. "I don't want to go back. Please help me." Grace's breath caught in her throat. She showed the note to Marcus, who read it with growing alarm. "She's scared," he said, his voice cracking. "And it's my fault if I hadn't pushed things today." "This isn't your fault," Grace interrupted firmly, though her own guilt gnawed at her. "None of us saw this coming. What matters now is finding her and making sure she's safe." They decided to split up again, covering more ground in their search. Grace headed toward the local library, knowing Maya sometimes went there to read quietly in the children's section. Marcus returned to the diner, hoping against hope that Maya might have slipped back inside unnoticed. As the sun began to dip, below the horizon, casting long shadows across the town, neither of them had found Maya. Exhaustion weighed heavily on Grace as she trudged back to the diner, her feet aching and her spirits low. When she arrived, she found Marcus pacing nervously. By the counter, his phone pressed to his ear. "I've called the police," he said as soon as he saw her. "They're sending someone over to file a missing person report." Grace nodded, relief washing over her despite the gravity of the situation. "Good. That's good. We need all the help we can get." While they waited for the officer to arrive, Grace made coffee for both of them, her hands shaking as she poured the steaming liquid into mugs. They sat together in silence, the weight of their failure pressing down on them. Neither spoke about the what-ifs or the mistakes they might have made. Instead, they focused on what came next, finding Maya and ensuring she never had to face such fear again. When the officer finally arrived, he listened intently as Grace and Marcus recounted everything that had happened, from Marcus's initial appearance at the diner to the explosive argument with Maya's father. The officer jotted notes diligently, asking thoughtful questions and promising to prioritize the search. Before leaving, he handed them a card with his contact information. "Call me immediately if you hear anything," he instructed. "We'll do everything we can to bring her home safely." After the officer left, the diner felt eerily quiet. The usual bustle of customers and clatter of dishes was absent, replaced by an oppressive stillness. Grace locked the door early, unwilling to deal with anyone else tonight. She and Marcus sat side by side at one of the booths, staring blankly at the table. "We can't give up," Marcus said finally, breaking the silence. If Maya thinks we've abandoned her now, she'll never trust us again. I know, Grace replied softly. But we also can't let her father win. Not after everything. They agreed to take shifts throughout the night, alternating between searching the streets and waiting at the diner in case Maya returned. Grace insisted on taking the first shift outside, wanting to stretch her legs and clear her head. As she walked aimlessly through the dimly lit streets, she replayed every interaction she'd ever had with Maya, searching for signs she might have missed. Had the girl hinted at running away before? Had she expressed fears that Grace hadn't taken seriously enough? Then, just as despair began to creep in, Grace spotted a faint light glowing in the distance. Following it, she realized it was coming from the small park where Maya often went to write. Her heart leapt as she quickened her pace, her footsteps crunching loudly on the gravel path. Sure enough, huddled beneath her favorite tree, sat Maya. Her knees were pulled tightly to her chest, her arms wrapped around them like a protective cocoon. In one hand, she clutched a pencil, scribbling furiously in a fresh notebook Marcus must have given her. Tears streaked her cheeks, but her focus remained unbroken, her pencil moving steadily across the page. Grace approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Maya," she called softly, her voice trembling with relief. Maya froze, her pencil pausing mid-stroke. Slowly she looked up, her wide eyes meeting Grace's. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then with a sob, Maya launched herself into Grace's arms, clinging to her as though afraid she might disappear. "Oh, sweetheart," Grace murmured, holding her tightly. "We were so worried about you." "I didn't know where else to go," Maya whispered, her voice muffled against Grace's shoulder. I thought maybe you wouldn't want me anymore." Grace pulled back slightly, cupping Maya's face in her hands. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "You will always have a place here, with me, with Lou's Diner. No matter what happens, okay?" Maya nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Grace helped her stand, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as they began the walk back to the diner. Along the way, Grace promised herself and Maya that they would figure this out together. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a team. Because sometimes, even in the darkest moments, love and determination are enough to light the way forward.